Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the first Teachers in Animal Law webinar this semester. We are really excited to be kicking off this semester with such a great and important topic, not to mention some wonderful panelists. Before we get started in today's discussion, I will give just a brief intro into myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Hannah Nabolsi, and I am a 3L at George Washington University Law School, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. And before we get into the panelist introductions, I do just like to give a brief overview of this webinar series for anyone who may be new and joining us for the first time. The Animal Law program at GW Law School has established the Animal Legal Education Initiative, which strives to incorporate animal law as a standalone discipline within the legal academy. This webinar series is intended to support adjunct professors across the country by creating opportunities to connect and collaborate with one another. And we hope to also provide you all with academic resources and a support system that can help you accomplish your goals within your institutions. And we say it every time, and we truly mean it, that these webinars are intended to be a conversational place and a networking platform. So to that end, please do feel free to send questions and comments in the chat or unmute yourself if you feel like you have a question. I also will reserve some time at the end for questions as well if you'd like to wait then. We also encourage you all to turn on your video if you're able and comfortable doing so. It's always great to be able to put names to faces. And finally, I do just want to mention that if you missed any of our previous webinars, the recordings of those are up on the GW Law website, so please do feel free to check those out. Today's event is also being recorded, and it will be made available on the GW Law website as well, so you can always reference back to today's discussion or share it with colleagues or friends if you think they might be interested. I also will say that we already have our next webinar scheduled on February 12th at 6 p.m. Eastern as well. And that webinar will be addressing syllabus and classroom policies. So definitely come back for that one. Now, moving on to today's webinar, we will be discussing dealing with difficulty. And we have a wonderful panel today. So I will turn it over to them to give a brief introduction. And we can start with Professor Kreitzer.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, I'm Rebecca Kreitzer, she, her pronouns. I'm really happy to be here with everyone tonight. I am an assistant professor at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health with adjunct appointments at law school in Indiana, as well as Lewis and Clark.
Thank you. Professor Katz.
Hi, thanks for having me here. My name is Professor Robin Katz. I'm an adjunct professor teaching animal law at St. Mary's School of Law down in San Antonio, Texas, and contract attorney with Animal Legal Defense Fund and assistant city attorney for the city of Austin.
Thank you so much. Professor Henry.
Hi, I'm Ralph Henry. I'm an adjunct at Georgetown Law, where I teach animal law. I've taught there for 7.5 years, and up until last semester, I taught at George Mason Law School for 15 years. And my practice is at the Humane Society of the United States, where I'm the director of litigation.
Thank you. And last but not least, Paige.
Hi, I'm Paige Scatina, and I'm a 1L at the University of Illinois, Chicago, pursuing animal law.
Thank you so much. It's so great to have you all here today. So I'd like to start our discussion today by first acknowledging law school can be difficult for a lot of students. I know my first year, I was always told that law school is unlike any other education that you've experienced, and I think that that can put a lot of pressure on students. And law school is undoubtedly challenging in and of itself. It takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of energy, but for some students, it's not the only challenge that they might be facing during their 3 or 4 years. Some students also have challenging realities, and there are things that they're dealing with in their personal lives that professors may be completely unaware of. So my first question is, when you're encountering new and challenging situations with a student, how do you typically determine how to respond?
I guess I'll start. Break the ice, right? I think first it's important to recognize that each student is different. Their personal situations, their schedules, their learning styles are all different. And so I try to take cues from the student. I try to keep in mind what my primary learning objectives are for the course and sort of make that the baseline from which I work to provide whatever accommodations I can to address difficulties that students have or direct them to resources the school has um, to do that. So, yeah, I think basically you have to sort of take each situation on a case by case basis because it's amazing what different situations students can get themselves into. I've been doing it for 15 years and every year there's something different. Yeah. So recognizing each student is different, trying to create open lines of communication and make sure that try to establish at the beginning of course that I'm available for you to chat about any difficulties is important.
Yeah, and I would just add to that that I always sort of like to come from a place of empathy in working with these students, especially early in the semester. You know, most of us are excited to be there and they want to learn, and so there are obstacles. You know, try to work with them to address them. And I think the other piece of it is understanding the sort of balance between equity and equality. As you know, was mentioned, not all students come to the table with the starting point. And so we want to make it as equitable as possible while also making sure it's a fair environment to the students of the class as a whole. And that can maybe be an easier to say in terms of the balance than it is to execute, but I try to keep that goal in mind.
And I would echo both professors' comments about this. I would also, I would add that we try to get them excited and we want to be empathetic, but we also are in a unique position because we're not full-time professors. We're operating as attorneys typically in our daily lives. And so we're really in tune with the reality of the situation when they graduate law school. And we want to make sure that we prepare them for real life situations. And some of their unique, challenging situations are very much unique and challenging, but in the real world, will a judge really care and give them an extra hour and a half unless all sides agree to it and so on. So we need to also make sure that we balance preparing them for the real world after law school and setting them up for success with the empathy.
Thank you so much. And that kind of leads into my second question, because students don't only deal with personal difficulties. Like I said, they deal with difficulties on a daily basis in classes. But I'm wondering if you maybe have experience that you could share of what some of those challenges are for students that are outside of their personal difficulties and their personal challenges. Maybe it could be something like the format of your teaching style, or perhaps the workload that they're dealing with all of their classes, or other extraneous circumstances. What type of difficulties do you see, and how do you help them work through those difficulties, especially if they're a first-year student and they're trying to get used to the type of workload and the type of work?
I'll start, I guess. There are a decent amount of difficulties that I think come all of our way, including you know, concerns from the students being expressed to us that maybe we have too much reading assigned, and balance and making sure that they understand when they express that to us that we also have a standard that we need to uphold with the ABA. And we have a required number of, well, not necessarily number of pages, but number of hours per week outside of class that we have to assign. So sort of bringing them into our world and helping them understand where we're coming from. Challenges regarding grading. Many of us, well, I have a really strict curve where, 10 to 25% of my students have to either fail or get Ds. 10% to 25% can get A minuses and above, and the rest are in the middle. And so making sure that they understand that, and understand that it's also difficult for us, especially as adjunct professors, because we see so many incredible students who have quality work and who just do it wonderfully in our classes. And there is that curve that we need to maintain. Other challenges that have been brought to my attention include students having children and trying to balance, you know, a lot of them work full time also, and my classes are in the evening. And so they'll have kids running in the background and it'll be distracting to other students, and they'll express that to me. And so helping them find a quiet place for them that's convenient for them and safe for them so that they can really get the most out of class and also allow other students in the class to get the most out of class as well, so it's not distracting. Some of those concerns have been brought up to me, and that's how I typically would handle them.
Yeah, and kind of going off it as a student, I know a lot of my peers like are very stressed with the coursework, but I think it's important to recognize, as you said, Robin, that you are required to have a certain amount of coursework, and that's kind of just law school in general, and you can't really work your way around that. It's going to be a lot of reading or a lot of work in general. But I think maybe like allowing them to like provide resources of like how you can get better at time management or different ways where it's like, yeah, you still have to do the work, but here's a way to kind of navigate it in a more smooth way might be helpful.
Yeah, as I said before, there's sort of innumerable situations a student can find themselves in that create conflict with engaging a course. I sort of end up effectively sort of categorizing them as concerns that relate to engagement of the course, and that adjustments in course design, either for that student or for all students with equity issues in mind and that sort of thing, um, can occur. And then ones that I can't really adjust the course design. It's really about accommodation in terms of timing or scheduling or those types of things. Most typically, those are personal things like family issues or medical issues. Um, and so I I do try to find out best I can to encourage students to identify for me issues about engagement of the course early on. I tend to ask students if they're having difficulty with the reading to tell me that. Um, my sort of opening spiel at the beginning of the course talks about these things, the learning objectives, and to encourage them to sort of talk to me about what they want to learn in the course. Maybe there are ways that we can adjust it. Surprisingly, I've had a number of students tell me that they don't like seeing imagery of animals harmed. That's a common one that comes up. Sometimes it's very specific. I had a student who was afraid of birds one year, and asked that we not include pictures of birds in PowerPoint slides. To the extent it doesn't undermine the sort of learning objectives for the course, I do try to make those adjustments as best I can. And so I hope to learn about as much of those that are the sort of engaging the the course itself as early as possible. You can't get ahead of all of them, but sometimes you can, and so sometimes you can make adjustments.
Thank you. I'd like to kind of take a shift now to talking about the faculty's role in addressing challenges and what resources or guidance may exist to help faculty navigate their responsibilities. So my first question here is, what responsibility and to what extent do you think a professor has to help students with difficulties?
It's a really interesting question, Hannah. I appreciate you asking. I hadn't ever thought about it in that way in terms of the responsibility. I think I come from a position of when a student presents a difficulty, I think myself, like many of us, we're there because we really want the students to learn. We want them to be excited about this topic and information. So I always feel motivated to want to help and try to address the difficulties. But I do think also, I mean, as faculty, as even adjunct faculty, we are there to do a job, which is to teach these students. And so to the extent there are obstacles, whether it's in the course design, or maybe it's the readings, or maybe it's personal issues that are getting in the way, I do think, to some extent we have a responsibility to help address that because that's part of the job we signed up for. I think just fortunately, most of us end up being pretty passionate about the work, so we also want to do so.
You mentioned being passionate about the work, but I'm sure that that can also take a toll on the professors as well, not only from, a time standpoint. You take time out of your day and out of your day jobs to be able to help provide support for students, but it can also take a mental toll if you're having to help students, especially if there's multiple students through their own challenges. So what resources have you seen exist for professors to help their students work through difficulties? What resources and support do you possibly have with your institutions?
I'll say that my experience is very different from school to school. Although the overall answer is not much, I think. Or you have to find it yourself. You sort of generate it. There have been so I've taught at Georgetown and George Mason, as mentioned before, and George Mason, they kind of give you the key to the door, let you come in and let you go, and there's maybe an adjunct orientation at the beginning, and there's a handbook, but you've got to read the handbook and find out what's available to you and that sort of thing. And there's not a lot of connectivity. Georgetown actually facilitates getting adjuncts, just the adjuncts together at the beginning of the semester. So you can make connections there. You can know what deans are, sort of in charge of various aspects of your work. You'll meet the dean of students, and I'm in the experiential program. So I know the dean of the experiential program. And so there's a lot more clarity about what resources might be available to me, going to other adjuncts, what deans to approach, those sorts of things, at one school than there is at the other.
I feel the same way. The school where I teach at St. Mary's is a smaller school. And since I teach remote, I also think so if you're teaching as an adjunct in person, it's also very different than teaching as an adjunct through a remote class because you're twice removed from the situation. So just serving as an adjunct, not just, but serving as an adjunct, you're not there on a daily basis, getting to know the administrators and so on and so forth and other professors. When you are also remote, you're really never at the institution. And so we also have a faculty handbook, and we are expected to read it and sort of navigate mostly on our own. That said, I found that our administrators are really receptive to questions, and I feel very comfortable reaching out to two of them who I've grown to develop a relationship with, a really good relationship with, to bounce ideas off of, or if I have students that present some unique issues that I haven't seen before, where I'm sort of walking a fine line as far as what to do about that. I do bounce ideas off of them, and they have no problem setting aside time. And then that way I'm just making sure that I'm doing everything the right way, because I think the last thing they want is to be blindsided if a student calls up and complains that, there's that the student complains about you. And then the dean's like, well, why didn't I hear about this before? And so you sort of get ahead of the curve there by talking to them first. I wouldn't say every situation, just the more challenging situations where you really are concerned about which direction to take.
So I echo, what has been said here 100%. And then the one thing I'd add is that I have found one resource that's very helpful, which may come from inside the institution or outside the institution, is identifying one or two people you can, call mentors, people who work in the animal law field or who work in the academic law teaching field, and that you can reach out to when you find yourself a little overwhelmed by a situation, even if you are discussing it in broad strokes. It's been an enormous help for me. And if you're looking for mentors, I'm sure most of the people who sort of are here today or who are sort of on this group would be happy to help and assist with that. It's part of, I think, why this group exists and is so lovely. But I think identifying who those go-to people are for you can be really key as well.
Yeah, I'll just mention that in my experience, and this sort of is consistent with what's been said so far, that relationships matter. They matter when you're teaching two. don't be a solo practitioner if you don't want to be a solo practitioner when you're an adjunct professor. And so, I know sometimes there can be a question of which administrator to go to or who to reach out to. And I have found that when I've reached out to the administrator whose job duties seem to match the situation, but is someone who's a stranger to me, it doesn't always work out. And then I connect with someone who I have a pre-existing relationship with, and I'm able to get some advice that I can rely on, or they refer me, and by virtue of that referral, the situation gets handled in the best way or the way the school would have it handled. Um, and so I just think that those relationships matter, and maybe the onus will be on you as an adjunct to seek them out, but they will pay dividends afterward. I had a very, very difficult situation this past semester, probably the most difficult situation I've had with a student in all my years of teaching. And I reached out to some administrators who seemed to be the right ones to talk to about it. And I got the sense that they punted to me. They may have had reasons to do so, saying, you're the one who's in charge of making sure the students get over the finish line and learn what they're supposed to learn in the course. So you're best positioned to help the student. But it felt like something that was not something I should handle, related to some medical issues and then how they presented themselves in class and affected other students. In the class. And so I kind of kept pestering very respectfully, and brought in another administrator who I had talked to before, and things ended up working out just fine when multiple people were involved and I had sort of kept knocking on the door, so to speak. And things ended up working out. But I'm glad to have had some established relationships with some folks in the administration that made it work.
Thank you. Although I'm not a professor, I know through these webinars that there can sometimes be difficulties with the administration and knowing how to navigate that and knowing who to go to. So I'm sure that it's very appreciated to have these tips and tricks on how to approach the administration when you're dealing with students with difficulty. And I actually want to go back and touch upon something that Professor Katz had mentioned. You had mentioned that some students might go to the administration and submit a complaint about a professor. So my question is, how do you recommend adjunct professors advocate for themselves, especially when they may be dealing with difficulties with the administration as well? How do you advocate for yourself in the face of that adversity, whether it be in the form of a complaint or a bad review? You're muted, Professor Katz.
Sorry. Of course, we're lawyers, most of us. And so documentation. When I speak with, and as an example, I received a feedback about somebody said that I was unavailable. I'm available weekends, evenings, because most of my students work during the day and I work during the day. And so, and that was just very, very far from the truth. So what I had been doing, thankfully, is keeping a log of every time I spoke with a student on the phone. I kept all of my emails. And so, part of that was part of my feedback at the end of the semester. And of course, now the administration wasn't concerned about that at all, but I was. So I proactively sent everything to them and said, just letting you know, I'm very available all the time, anytime, on Saturday nights, I rearranged my schedule for these students. So I think documentation is key. Also kind of touching upon what I just said about administration wasn't concerned, but I was. I do my own surveys, anonymous surveys, because a lot of students sometimes are concerned, especially when the class is not a class where you're grading based on a PIN number. My students have projects, so I know who's submitting things to me and grading the whose work I'm grading. And so some of them are concerned that, if they speak up, then I'll deduct a grade, or, we don't get along, which is also far from the truth. So I set up an anonymous survey, which is truly anonymous. And throughout the semester, if they have a question or a concern, then they can provide their feedback. My class is very fluid. I'm flexible on changing things throughout the semester. That said, you're never going to please everybody. And so something that I think a lot of us professors might take to heart is that feedback. And so, be gentle to yourselves. No, you're not going to please everybody. When half the class wants more case law, the other half of the class may want more discussion. So really, you're in charge of the class, and develop it in a way that is best suited for your students as a whole, and to prepare them again for the real world. Give them a taste of animal law, or whatever course you're teaching, and get them excited about it so that they can be successful and set them up for success. But most of that advocating for myself comes from documentation and logging, because I think, as in the past, I don't know, 10, 15 years, things have changed dramatically with education. And when I was in law school, I don't think my professors would ever consider logging when they spoke to me on the phone or things like that. But now, think that things have changed, I think it's really important to do.
And so you mentioned setting students up for success, and it was mentioned a little earlier that adjunct professors and professors in general are in academia because they want to help students. They want to work directly with students and help them succeed and have fulfilling careers. But have you ever dealt with a situation in which the administration is treating the school more so as a business? And so when difficulty arises, they're more focused on getting students just to complete the course rather than helping them through their difficulty or providing resources that may help them in their situation. Have you dealt with a situation like that? And what did you do to try to help the student or overcome that?
I have. I don't know that my strategies are the best advice. So I'll generalize it to say, try to get ahead of that by telling students at the outset of a course that I am available to them. I even often point out that I'm an adjunct, that I'm a practitioner, and I'm coming to school just for this course to be there with them. And so, if there is a difficulty, they might want to connect with me, because sometimes we can make adjustments um, in ways that the administration can't or won't. Um, but yes, I've had situations where the administration sort of had a hard and fast rule. And frankly, this is the part that probably people maybe shouldn't listen to. I don't know. As adjuncts, it can sometimes be very difficult to get the help you need, but you also kind of fly under the radar quite a bit. And so I've had some situations where students were really struggling getting access to the course in some way, coming to class, getting through readings, that sort of thing. And by um and sort of managed to find ways around it where I felt like they were still getting what they needed, but the the sort of blunt object that is the school's policy, we managed to avoid a little bit. So I had a student who, at one school, they had a very strict requirement on number of classes you could miss. And she ended up coming to me in tears in the middle of one class, very ill, beyond ill, and shouldn't have needed to be there in that class, but she was anticipating having to miss a few later sessions, and so felt that she had to because school policy. And I talked with her and I said, as empathetically as possible, I didn't want to sort of cast blame on the fact that she came to class, but um, you know, I wish for your sake that you had told me ahead of time, because I would have told you, don't come to class. There's a way that we can make sure that when you and I can meet separately, that you can work through the material and we could talk about what the discussion was in class and those sorts of things, so that you didn't miss this class session. Um, and so, there are some rules that you just have to follow, and you have to sort of do what the administration wants, and sometimes it can be like a business. They're trying to get students across the line for graduating, so they may not issue a paper extension in a particular circumstance where you would say that the situation warrants it otherwise, but it's out of your hands. And I just try to be clear with students when it is out of my hands and defer to the university because they have policies for a reason. But sometimes you can make adjustments that don't make it unfair to other students and that can help a student. And I find that presenting myself as the person who will do that when I can at the beginning of the course makes it so that students are more likely to talk to me than not.
Yeah, I definitely notice, especially now it being the first week, you're going through the syllabus and everyone's giving their introduction speeches. And I think when professors do really voice that they care about their students and they're willing to be obviously like understandable if real world life comes up and there's certain circumstances, but also recognize that it is an institution and there's certain rules that they have to follow. So the sooner you can alert them of anything and kind of give them a forewarning of this is going on, I'm going to try to make this deadline, but I'm really stressed or whatever it may be, and kind of just keeping them in the loop. So it's not the day before something's due and you were like, oh, these past weeks, and you're kind of just going through everything and they were never aware of it. So I think definitely voicing that can be helpful to students to really recognize that professors understand that you're a human and there's not just law school happening and there's other situations that can come up, but also as students recognizing that professors do have their hands tied at a certain point and then they can't really do much, and kind of just creating that balance and that communication. So hopefully whatever it is can be worked out in a proper way.
Can I jump in here too, if that's all right? So sorry, I'm not a panelist. My name is Daria Bednarczyk. I'm a 3L at Vermont Law and Graduate School, but I am an adjunct professor for undergraduate classes. And I have noticed that if I have a student that is struggling, I will reach out to their advisor or what have you. And sometimes I've been met with just PDFs sent to me or another contact or a resource that doesn't really seem helpful. It seems to be doing the students more of a disservice because there's no face-to-face contact. So what I do with students that I think are struggling, I will contact them regarding what they're struggling on and then offer up my personal time and say that I'm here to be utilized as a resource. If there's a time that you'd like to meet, let's talk about it, because otherwise they're going to fall behind. But then again, it's up to the student if they want to receive that type of help, because I, like Paige has stated, have constantly drilled that I am available to you. Use me as a resource. I'm here. Please tell me ahead of time if there's a problem. Like, I am so willing to give you an extension. But if the students don't do that on their end, then I'm kind of tied to what the university wants and university policies. So there's only so much you can really do. And I think it's kind of it's a two-player game. It's upon the student and it's upon the professor. So thank you.
Yeah,
I
thank you.
appreciate. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Hannah.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to say I appreciate Daria chiming in with that. It's a really good reminder. We do want to be there for the students and support them, and but there are times when our hands are tied. And I had a situation, I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, sometime in the last couple of years, where I feel like I had developed a pretty good relationship with most of my Animal Law 101 students. And really, really sadly, one of the students, Kat, who was very much part of the family, passed away the day before the final. And the student reached out to the administration and asked for an extension that would have been in line with if I think your aunt or your mom or your sibling passed away, there was a policy for that, but they wouldn't grant it for the cat passing. And, it's animal law. And so I think there's like sort of a lot of topics sort of tied up in this, right? She reached out to me, and I would have loved to have sort of gone to the school and said, of course you should give an extension, kind of been the champion for the student. But I didn't feel like I really had the position or authority or the voice as an adjunct professor. And so in this context, what I ended up doing was saying, I'm here for you. I'm a resource for you. If you want me to sort of write about write a letter as an expert about, what pets mean to people along those lines. I'm happy to do that. But also just providing the emotional support, which I felt like I was in a place and capable of doing, and acknowledging her loss and supporting her, and, letting her know you may not get the best grade on this final you have to take tomorrow, and maybe that's okay. But we had to go with the policy of the school. And so I bring that up as just sort of an anecdote of times when your hands are really tight and it can be really hard, but it does happen, and we can still sort of be there to support our students in different ways.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you all so much for your comments. I think it's really important to understand the student perspective, and I'm hearing a lot of great things about communication and understanding to a reasonable level, and some flexibility. And I think it's also important to highlight what was said before, that it is up to the student, when they are dealing with difficulty, to reach out and to seek that help that they may need. But I think it's also important to recognize that that's difficult for some students. Some students are maybe intimidated by their professors, or don't really know how to approach professors when they have a sensitive topic that they need to talk about. So do you think it would ever be helpful to have a student that was previously in your class come to your class, maybe at the beginning of the semester, and talk to students about their experience in your class and ways to be successful and ways to reach out for help, or just, give their contact information and offer themselves as a student mentor or support system? Do you think that would ever be helpful?
I definitely have seen it be helpful. In one of my courses last semester, we had two former students come in and they were able to like help with office hours and stuff like that. And I know a lot of my peers very much preferred going to the student office hours rather than the professors. And it wasn't because they didn't like the professor or some sort of situation came up, but just kind of having it where it's not that intimidation kind of factor that unfortunately is there for a lot of students. And it also allows them to have someone that was new, just was learning about it to a semester ago or a year ago, and saying like, this is how I did it and you're gonna be fine, and this is the approach you should be taking, or this is what worked for me, rather than the professor. I feel like sometimes when a professor can give advice, even if it's genuine and it's honest and the student would say the same thing, sometimes I think students take it as, well, of course, because you're the expert in this. Like, of course it's easy. You don't know how it is to be a student learning, like you haven't gone to law school in a while or whatever it may be. So I think hearing it from your peers can give it this a better connection to students, even if the same thing is being said. I'm not sure exactly why, but based on experience, it seems like a lot of students definitely prefer to hear from their peers.
On the other hand, I hate to be like the Debbie Downer, but I've also realized that in law school, we have so much pride. It's such a, big opportunity to go to law school, and you're expected to be so smart. And I know our professors tell us you're not going to know everything, but we hold ourselves to a certain standard where I have been a resource for 1Ls or 2Ls, and I've tried to make myself available to give us students perspective, and nobody's ever contacted me, which I was kind of disappointed because I was so excited to speak to them. But I think it's just a mentality of, this is up to me, I should know what I'm doing, I'm not going to reach out for any help. I think it's just a sense of pride, and that's not speaking about all students, but it could be, a small portion that don't want to reach out to anyone because they feel like they have to do it on their own, unfortunately.
Sorry, Rebecca, go ahead. I was going to mention, along with having a student come maybe at the beginning of class, the first class for 10 minutes, a former student who did pretty well, maybe in a leadership role, SALDF, talk about the course and, how they worked, what worked well for them in the course. And, it's very doable. Also, maybe having some former students who are practicing animal law now. I have a few prosecutors who I'm working this weekend. I'm meeting with them halfway to go over their voir dire, because they have their first big animal cruelty case. And to have them come back and talk with students and say, this course is valuable, it's doable, it's valuable, and I'm putting it into practice. And that also offers a potential networking opportunity for those current students to sort of think ahead and to maintain a relationship with students who are actually practicing animal law now.
Yeah, I definitely think that would be a great idea. I think students would really enjoy that, and seeing kind of like their end goal in real life, I feel like is a good reminder to tell them like why they're there and what they're working towards.
I'll also add it's a bit of I think a unique situation. But at Lewis and Clark, they very kindly have offered the adjuncts a TA. So somebody who actually is sort of a little bit closer to the student in terms of maybe their professional trajectory, but also just isn't the professor. And it was interesting. It was my first time teaching with a TA last semester, and it was interesting to me to see which students were really engaged with the TA. Would reach out to the TA first before they would reach out to me, and those that would come to me directly, and those that would email us both simultaneously. And so I raised this just to Daria's point that I think there is, diversity in sort of what the students are looking for. So offering it as a resource, I think is great, and some will take advantage. Perhaps not all. But if I had the opportunity to have a TA at my other university, I would certainly take them up on that. And so I may think about having a student come in and talk to them at the beginning. And I would love to have a student come in who has graduated and gone on to work in animal law. That's the dream. So I love that.
Yeah, it sounds like having someone in the classroom that has a little bit more of a relatable experience to the student perspective is very valuable. And I do just want to point out Dean Hessler's very important comment that it's important for students to know that grades don't define you. They don't indicate how professional or how good at your job you'll be once you graduate. And I remember my first year, one of my professors had a former student come in and talk about midterms, kind of ease some nerves. And that student admitted she failed her midterm, and it was a bad experience for her. But she said, you know what, at the end of the semester, I learned from it and I came out with a good grade. I learned from my mistakes for the final and everything was okay. And I think that's very valuable for students, especially as they're learning to navigate something difficult for the first time. It's okay if you don't get it right your first try, as long as you learn from it and use that as an opportunity to do better in the future. So thank you for that comment, Dean Hessler. Now, I do want to acknowledge that, sometimes you have students that are giving you difficulty that doesn't necessarily have to deal with personal difficulties or other challenges that they may be facing in their life. Sometimes they just don't want to do the work. Maybe that's because they're taking your class simply because it fulfills a credit requirement. Maybe they, thought the class would be interesting at first and then realized they weren't super invested. So how do you address students who just simply don't want to do the coursework?
Can I? Oh no,
Oh,
I
go
see.
for it, Daria.
So I actually had this exact experience, and it was very frustrating because I knew that this student had so much to say and so much potential, but I think that the projects that were assigned to them at the time just weren't engaging enough. And then the most shocking thing to me was the final project. This student came in like a shining star and gave me everything that I was looking for throughout the semester. So I think with varying personalities and learning capabilities, you just have to find what works. But again, like I know that what was mentioned earlier is you're not going to please everyone. You're not going to be able to accommodate everyone every single time. But hopefully over the course of a semester, you'll be able to find something that sparks that student and engages them to want them to participate more so.
I found that one of the most important tools I have is the why of the course. When I talk to students at the beginning of the course, my opening spiel has changed a lot over the years. And it used to be a lot more of the what of the course, walking through the syllabus, learning objectives, evaluation. Um, Now I explain a lot more about how we're going to go through the course, how to engage the readings, how the paper, which I have a final paper in Georgetown's course, how it should or shouldn't necessarily relate to seminar discussions, and what I want them to get out of it. The motivations of the players involved in these conflicts matter more to me, in terms of your understanding come out of the course than say the black letter animal law, which is true of my experiential course. But the opposite might be true of a different animal law course. I think by explaining that at the outset, and then I remind students, usually not one-on-one. If I have a student that's just disengaged, I could do that. But throughout the course, I try to make clear to the students um, why I think it matters that the engagement of the course, the engagement of the materials. So the most frequent thing I see is it's usually not one student, it's usually maybe half to 99% of the students somewhere in the middle of the semester just kind of not doing as much with the reading as maybe they did at the beginning. They're overwhelmed by other things. And so I will again try to reinforce why I think we're doing things. Um, these are graduate school students, so to some degree, if they check out, um, that's on them, and it might reflect in their evaluation at the end of the course. Participation is a component of the grade in my course. Um, but I want them to at least know why it is we're doing the thing that we're doing so that they understand what they're missing out on. And to some degree, it ends up being this sort of not shaming, but just, this engagement of why I think it matters and it can matter to them. And I'll have a conversation with a student about, if they seem disengaged about what we talked about, which might present as sort of like gauging their interest in what it was that we were talking about earlier, or a particular case that they seem to be not aware of that we were talking about, or something like that. And then trying to ask them questions about their law school experience, where they're going to go work. A lot of my students are not going to be animal law lawyers. They're taking it out of interest. And then I try to connect the dots for them and say why learning the way we're learning, what we're learning should matter to them. And if that doesn't take, it doesn't take. And ultimately, a lot of student learning at this level needs to be self-directed. But I've found that if I just explain why it is we're doing, I've seen in my student evaluations at the end of the course, a lot of that parroted back. So I'm glad I took this course, because even though I won't be doing mission-based advocacy, or I won't be a public interest lawyer, because I already signed up to work for the devil at Skadden or whatever, I think that I learned how lawyers in this sort of context make decisions, why in-house work is different than, firm work or something like that, and I find them repeating, maybe just because they have to put something down on paper in their evaluations, the what I said I thought they should get out of the course. And so it must be there somewhere in their head. But ultimately, like, you can't force a student um, to engage.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know that it certainly helps when you have an adjunct professor who does this type of work for a living, and they clearly are very motivated by the work that they do. I know that certainly helps students get involved and want to participate more because they have an expert that they're learning directly from. So I would like to pivot now to talking about best practices for addressing students with difficulty. And we talked quite a bit about utilizing the administration when you have questions or when you need support or resources. But I wonder, can you advise when is typically the right time to start involving the admins?
So I take a crack at it first. So at least I am not constantly bothering the deans at the law school. But if it's a major issue, like if we're talking about plagiarism, using AI when they're not supposed to be, or ChatGPT when they're not supposed to be, something like that, that's when I go immediately to the admins. But otherwise, if there's a hiccup in the course, or if they've missed, or they're continuously late, something like that, then I first try to have a conversation with them to address it and kind of figure out what's going on. Maybe there's something going on that I'm not aware of. I give them the opportunity to explain it to me, document it, of course. And then if it continues, that's when I reach out to the administration. And there are times when there are students who are frequent flyer students, and frequent flyer students are students that other full-time professors are aware of because they operate the same way in their classes, or the administrators already know these students' names, and not necessarily in a good way. And so it might be helpful to reach out to the administration in situations where you see repetitive issues with the same student, because it may not just be your class, and whatever dean you speak with may have some helpful feedback or tools that you could use to help rein the student back in, or they may have a conversation with the student, him or herself.
Thank you so much. And I do just want to take a pause here. I see we have about 8 minutes till the top of the hour, so I'd like to open it up for any questions or comments that we may have from any of the attendees.
I'm just wondering how many of your courses are seminars where the grade is determined by a paper, or some of you said a project, and how many of you have courses that are the traditional lecture, and the students on the exam have to issue spot. And I have a second part to that question, but I'm just wondering what your experience is with the content of your course and the assignments. How do you do that? Do you find one way that students learn best from, or not?
So I'll just start off by saying I have a couple of courses that I teach, and so my 101 course, I do a standard exam. There's some debate, I think, around whether or not an animal law 101 course is best evaluated by an exam or a paper, because it is sort of a niche area of law, an evolving area of law. Some people have advocated for the paper, but I think there's also an argument that there is black letter law to be learned in this space. And so, you can do your standard multiple choice essay, issue spotting, and that's what I've chosen to do for that course. I do also teach a couple of upper level courses, so an animal legal philosophy course, and then I co-teach a course on law and ethics of animal testing. And so the legal philosophy course is a paper, as you might expect, because it's sort of a jurisprudential focused course. And then the law and ethics is also an exam, because a lot of it is learning, again, the black letter law, and sort of it's a very regulatory heavy space. And so I think it depends, exactly what the course is you're teaching, what your objectives of the course are, what you want the students to get out of it, in terms of what evaluation method you use.
I can add really briefly that in working with adjuncts and full-time faculty who teach in the animal law space all across the country and even outside the country, there isn't a uniform way. And so it partly depends on someone's teaching style, right? It partly depends on the context, the content, and sort of to the topic here, there are different challenges with each style, right? And so trying to figure out how to overcome or minimize the challenges that one style produces. So if it's a paper course, how to get students to stay interested in topics that they're not writing about. For instance, if it's an exam course, how to get students not just to sort of be trying to prepare to rotely regurgitate things that they've learned in your class. So it's the students have different learning styles, teachers have different teaching styles, and content may or may not lend itself to a particular style, but you kind of have to put all that together and figure out how to do whatever it is and sometimes adjuncts don't have a choice. It's mandated a particular, this is a seminar course, so it's a paper, what have you. And so just sort of once you know what that context is, then trying to navigate those challenges and reduce the difficulties both for yourself, right, as the teacher and also for the students, I think is the sort of reality, right, that we end up finding ourselves in.
And then with the traditional black letter law course, this relates to just law school exams in general. Do you tell students in the beginning, this is how exams should be written? Because I remember when I first wrote exams, I was such a writer that I would go too much into detail and then end up missing a lot of the points. And I just wonder, I was like, I wish I had known earlier in law school how to best approach an exam. Do you make sure students know how to do that? I'm just curious. Or is that something that they need to find out about, on their own?
I'm my courses are all paper courses. I've only done one exam once, but
Okay.
I think I could at least offer some answer that probably applies in exam courses as well. And that's I have been surprised. I thought coming into teaching that students would know how to write a paper and that it would always be the way that I envisioned it, and it's definitely not true. And I've found that I don't give students too much hand-holding by explaining at the beginning of the semester what I'm looking for in the paper. Not just like very basic nuts and bolts like footnotes, endnotes, 20 pages, whatever, but what it's mine's supposed to be sort of a scholarly writing paper akin to a student note, and so I explain pretty basically what I think that is. I even did some research on how law schools define student notes, scholarly papers, and now put that in my syllabus. Um, I don't I'm generally very flexible as to what students end up producing. Um, but yeah, I try to lay out sort of expectations about what they're to accomplish through the process of writing the paper as much as I can.
So I know we're running out of time. The first 2 years I taught, I had an exam that combined multiple choice and two shorter essays. And I gave them the rubric ahead of time so they knew exactly what I was looking for, so that they knew what to look for. But the last 6 years of teaching, I changed to a legislative project. So it's not necessarily a paper, but I give them the power to choose a piece of legislation they think needs to get introduced in Texas or needs to be amended. So that's how I get them engaged. They pick the topic. And then I give them previous students who did excellent, and I get their permission to give them examples of really good examples of former students who did very well. I give them the rubric ahead of time. And the final project, I also give them a choice. They can use the platform of a website or a pre-recorded PowerPoint, so that some people are more technical on the web. Some people would prefer to, be a speaker, and they can submit that project. So it's a lot of choosing, but they have the rubric ahead of time. And the final piece is something that they can use in real life in legislation. They can work with reps and senators, and they have before, to get legislation passed in the state. So that's how I get them engaged. That's how I prepare them to do well on their project throughout the semester. And it's really up to them, as Ralph mentioned.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. I see that we do only have 1 minute left, and while I'm sure that we could talk about this topic for hours, I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So, oh my gosh, I see the parrot there. That's so cute. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to our wonderful panelists for all of your wonderful insight. This has been, I know, extremely informative for me, and I hope you all have found it informative as well. As a reminder, our next webinar will be on February 12th from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern. And again, we will be addressing syllabus and classroom policies. So we certainly hope that you'll join us for that webinar as well. And we'll circulate some more information regarding that as the event gets closer. So thank you all again, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.